afternoon. Welcome to the ACS Florida, South Florida Lawyers Chapter panel on Ununited State of Cannabis. Today, my name is Easter Floyd Clark, and I am a board member with the ACS South Florida Lawyers Chapter. And I am being joined today by Maritza Perez. Maritza is the director of the Office of National Affairs for the Drug Policy Alliance, the Diversity Committee co-chair, and she's also an ACS Washington, D.C. lawyer chapter member. The other panelist is Cheryl Murray Powell, Esquire. She is an attorney with Dumar Allsworth et al. She's in cannabis, agriculture, and a dietary supplement attorney. Today, we are going to just go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone who has joined us today. A little about ACS. ACS is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. ACS does not endorse any candidate or political party. Views expressed here today are those of the speakers and reflect their individual opinions and should not be attributed to ACS. For today's program, I wanted to start off with a little bit of a historical context for cannabis and the place that is held in American history. And from there, I want us to segue into the current state of cannabis, what's going on at the federal level, what's going on at the state level. And since we are here in Florida, for those of us that are in Florida, what's going on here in Florida locally as well. I also want to look at a huge piece of legislation that's moving through Congress, the MORE Act. So I want to unpack that a little bit. And then I want to also discuss what's going on in other countries, like what is it that they are doing with their cannabis laws? How can we as America look at what they're doing, maybe as a model, or even what they may have challenges with, so we know what to avoid as we navigate these troubled waters. And then I want to look at moving forward. So if and when marijuana does become legal, how do we navigate that? What does it look like for us here in America? So the first question for you ladies is, can you give us a little bit of the historical backdrop of cannabis? How did we get here where we are, where everything is pretty much kind of like, one of the terms that I've heard about people describing cannabis as it stands right now is the Wild Wild West. So what is it, what took place over the years that has pretty much gotten us to this point where we are looking at this industry as the Wild Wild West?
So I'll get started. So, the history of cannabis is the history of mankind. Cannabis has existed and been used for medicinal and fiber purposes for over 1,000 years. So, it's nothing new, or as they say in the UK, they're considering CBD to be a novel food, but we don't consider it to be new or novel. It's something that's been a part of indigenous communities for hundreds of years. There was a recent article that identified that cannabis probably came about in Asia. It was the first sighting or the first evidence of cannabis is in Asia, the Asian continent. So that's really good to know. I mean, even, being Jamaican and having cannabis associated with Jamaica, we call cannabis ganja, but that word ganja is actually from India. And it came over with our Indian immigrants to Jamaica. So there's a very indigenous history when it comes to the plant. When we look at prohibition, prohibition is very steeped in racism. Usually prohibition of anything is steeped in racism. And that's what we've seen with the cannabis plant. So we've had 7 decades of prohibition before we started seeing legalization efforts in this country. And we've made great strides. The progress that we've seen really is on the backs of our patients. Whether you're a hemp lover or a cannabis lover, you really have to give honor to the medical marijuana patients that really were brave enough to say, I want to be able to treat my condition, or I want to be able to treat my child's condition with cannabis as one of the choices along with pharmaceutical medicines and things like that. So we've come a long way. We have to thank the activists and the medical marijuana patients for getting us this far. We also need to thank the physicians that were brave enough to be called quacks and be ostracized by their profession in order to recommend marijuana as a treatment. There was also a nurses contingent that founded Patients Out of Time, one of the first advocacy organizations. Mary Lynn Mathry was the founder of Patients Out of Time. She did research work with NORML before she founded that organization, and it was extremely controversial. I recently joined the board of Patients Out of Time, so I have the honor of serving with Mary Lynn Mathry as we continue to advocate. So, there's research that's been done by Dr. Dreher with the Rastafarian community in Jamaica a few decades ago with pregnant Rastafarian women, and just looking at the implications of marijuana use. And those studies are still used today, and showing that there is no deficiency in intellect and development with Rastafarian women who are using cannabis. So, looking at cannabis historically, it's a combination of activism, medicinal evolution, and science and research, and that's what's gotten us to this point today. And I must as well call attention to the fact that it was steeped in racism. There have been a lot of fallen soldiers who have been wrongly incarcerated for the plant, and that's what drives our social justice initiatives to this day. So, there are a lot of Black and brown people who have been incarcerated for a plant that is legal, that, mainstream, mostly white male Americans are making millions off of that same plant. And there's a place for all of us in unity, without segregation, to advocate for the freedom of this plant so that we can continue to innovate, continue to see the medicinal benefits. We can continue to see the use of it as a sustainable plant, and also see our climate change benefits, as well as carbon sequestering benefits that will come with full legalization.
I'd like to just briefly add to that. What we see with cannabis isn't unique when we talk about drugs generally. For thousands of years, people have done drugs for all sorts of reasons, whether it be therapeutic, medicinal, cultural, recreational. People have done drugs since literally humans have been on this earth. People have used drugs for a variety of reasons. But it wasn't until very, very recently, actually, that we started to see drug prohibition come on the books, both at the federal and state level. And that really was rooted in racism, as Cheryl pointed out. We saw the first anti-drug laws pop up in California, and these were anti-opium laws that were targeting Chinese migrants who at the time, white people saw as a threat to job security in California. Shortly after that, we saw similar laws come up in the South, and those laws were targeted at Black men who were using cocaine. And around the same time, we also saw, the Mexican-American War and the Mexican Revolution come to an end, and Mexican migrants being targeted for using marijuana. And this was around the 1930s or so when we first saw marijuana pop up, not just at the state level, but at the federal level as prohibited. And I think something that's important to point out is that before we use the term marijuana, for government purposes and even everyday exchanges, people used cannabis. They used the word cannabis just to describe what it is, the plant. But it was a very intentional decision by the federal government to call cannabis marijuana, to associate it with Mexican Americans, to make it sound scary and foreign, and to stigmatize it and make it sound bad and criminalize it and criminalize the people who use it. And I think that's really important because, one, marijuana is still the term that's used in our federal codes, and that's a very charged term when you know that history, right? I think today most people use marijuana and don't think about that history, but that's indeed what happened. But then also we have to look at the outcomes. We still know that people of color are overrepresented in terms of arrest and conviction for marijuana. We know that people of color and white people use marijuana at similar rates, but people of color are more likely to be arrested. Each year the ACLU does a study on this, and they consistently find that while white and Black people use marijuana at the same rate, Black people are about 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana activity. So it's really important that we keep that racism at the top of our mind, because these laws weren't made by happenstance. It was a targeted policy decision by our federal government, by state governments, that play out today in terms of the effects of mass incarceration and who's impacted in the criminal legal system.
Thank you. I do want to remind for any attendees, if you do have any questions as our speakers are speaking, definitely feel free to use the Q&A box. I will be posing these questions to our panelists, so given time permitted, they will be answered. So feel free to use that feature. And so now that we do know that the history of cannabis in America has had a very colorful past, and how it has how it has been rooted in racism, and how it's still pretty much coming forward today in 2021, and we're seeing it as these policies are being put in place and these states are legalizing it in one form or another, that these same communities that were torn apart because of the war on drugs are now being blocked out of this industry that is now pretty much just full of capital and just thriving, and they are not being able to be stakeholders. So I want to know, like, as far as now on the hurdles that people who want to enter this industry, like what things are they starting to see, like from a state point of view, when these people are trying to enter the industry, like what type of hurdles are they starting to see? Because I know that's something that you have dealt with or seen, Cheryl, in some of your work that you do from day to day. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is that is pretty much keeping people from entering that space and being able to actually enter this industry and see some of the fruits of what, not that they've built up, but some of the fruits of what this industry is putting out there now?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Easter. So when we look at the, and I want to frame it. When we look at the industry, first of all, when we talk about cannabis, cannabis is the genus. How we talk about genus and species. So cannabis or cannabis sativa. When we're talking about cannabis, it includes hemp and it includes marijuana. So I'm going to speak from that context of breaking it down. So when we talk about in the state of Florida, the marijuana industry, we had a constitutional amendment in 2014 that was proposed on the ballot, and it missed being passed by 2 percentage points. And then the legislature took it in their own hands to go ahead and legalize, and they came up with the Compassionate Use Act, which was for very low THC, less than 0.8% was the measurement, and they had a round of applications for that. The intent was to select 5 participants, one from Northeast, one from Northwest, one from Southeast, one from Southwest, and one from Central Florida. They proceeded and they issued those licenses, and it was very glaring that there was no diversity in the mix of applicants that were being selected. And even non-Black applicants had issue with that particular round. First, just talking about the race and equity aspects of it, the criteria for submitting at that time required you to be a 30-year nurseryman. It required you to have 400,000 plants, which is the type of policy that's put in place to be exclusionary and not have full participation in a process. So the Black Farmers and Agriculturalists of Florida had a lawsuit. They were successful. I much later became the executive director of the Black Farmers and Agriculturalists of Florida for a period of 1.5 years. However, they were supposed to be issued a license that became cemented into legislative law in 2017. This license was supposed to be issued on October 3rd of 2017. It has still to this date not been issued. Okay. Beyond that, beyond the 5 initial license holders, due to a number of lawsuits, we are now at 22 license holders. That is great to hear because we definitely have the demand in Florida. However, when you think of the fact that those 22 license holders all came from that first round of applications where exclusionary restrictive criteria were used, meaning you had to have 400,000 plants, 30-year nurserymen, even though the law changed since that, the issuance of license is from the same round of people who submitted under that criteria. So nothing's really changed. We are still in a posture where we are waiting for the second round of applications for the state of Florida. So I think that's the biggest obstacle and hurdle for someone wanting to participate in the marijuana industry in Florida is the fact that there is no opportunity to participate in the marijuana industry as a licensed holder in Florida, and there hasn't been an opportunity since 2015. Okay. Recently, the Florida Department of Health has indicated that they are reviewing their policies, they're writing the regulations, and they intend to issue do another round of applications. It could be weeks, it could be months, and that they also indicated that they're going to be prioritizing the Black farmers license, which is also good news. So finally, what was written in 2017 may come to pass in 2021. And that's an eye opener when it comes to, lobbying and fighting for things to be entered into legislation. If the executive branch does not execute on what is legislated for a variety of reasons, whether it's lawsuits, how American is that, right? How American is it that we can pass laws and have people who we elected to represent us put in place laws, have it signed into law by the governor of the executive branch, and then never have it executed for a number of years later, and putting the people of the state in jeopardy with regard to their access to medicine and the biodiversity of the plant needed for specific illnesses. So it's really a travesty. So that's just talking about the license holder side of things on the medical marijuana side. So with the medical marijuana industry, there's also an ancillary business, which has been thriving. When I say ancillary, it's really, those are the people that don't have a license with the state, but they support the industry. They're people like lab services, testing marijuana. They've been thriving. They have plenty of material to test on the marijuana side and the hemp side. Cannabis marketing companies, cannabis education companies have been doing well prior to legalization. People have been going to events about getting into the marijuana industry before marijuana was legal in the state, and they continue to do so today, even though there isn't around for them to enter into. So the ancillary business area of the business is definitely an opportunity. There are a lot fewer barriers for entry when you consider that. Also looking at the fact that we haven't had an equity law passed, an equity bill passed, anything that really indicates that will correct and remedy the fact that we haven't had diverse participation. Issuing the Black farmers license is a step in the right direction, but keep in mind the criteria for that license is you have to be a Pigford litigant. Pigford litigants are people who were successful in a USDA case years and years ago. We have lost Pigford litigants since that law was put in place in 2017. They are an aging community. There aren't that many Pigford litigants still alive in the state of Florida. So when that license is issued, there's a very narrow, it's very narrowly focused as far as who's eligible for that license. So there needs to be something more equitable, an equity bill that goes into place, which creates an opportunity that represents the diversity in the state of Florida. And I'm not just talking about Black farmers, I'm talking about Black entrepreneurs, I'm talking about our Hispanic, Latinx community, I'm talking about our growing number of Asian farmers that would like to participate in this industry. I'm talking about just business people overall, our micro businesses. I worked with State Representative Anika Onfroy on a bill last session, in order to, it was an equity bill. So it included community reinvestment. It included home grow provisions. It included expungement provisions, and it allowed for a diverse representation of our community to participate. That bill didn't have the support in order to pass. We have every intention of filing again in this upcoming session, but we need people to speak out, call their legislators, and demand that there be an equity bill passed in Florida, just like we've seen in Illinois, in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Michigan, California, through a number of municipalities. So, the time is now. The time is way overdue, but the time is now. We acknowledge that our our current license holders have done great work as far as, one, establishing an industry, two, supporting education and supporting the nonprofits that educate communities. Like Truliev's done a lot of work with minorities for medical marijuana and things like that. So we don't want to take anything from the large existing license holders, but we do say you've had a long enough head start, and it's time to open up the industry so we can really have a free and open marketplace, which is very much representative of the spirit of America. Now, on the hemp side of things, not to take too long, that's another opportunity. Currently, to cultivate hemp in the state of Florida, there's no cost for a license. When they were developing the hemp rules, there were some exclusionary rules that were attempted, and some remained. One example is they tried, even though it wasn't statutory, the Department of Agriculture tried to put a bond on hemp growers. Well, who has difficulty getting bonds, agricultural bonds? It would be the Black community, it would be the minority community. And we were successful in getting that removed. Language like it has to be on bona fide agricultural purposes land. Well, that means you've been a farmer, you filed your Form F with the IRS, and that's also restricted. What about our urban farmers who are new and beginning farmers, that because of cannabis, they're entering agriculture? Hemp is a great opportunity for them to get engaged. So that still remains. However, we were successful in getting them to add industrial as well. So to grow hemp in Florida, you have to either have a nursery license or be on bona fide agricultural purposes land, which is a statutory definition, or you can be on industrial land. That was the recent insertion. So hemp is a huge opportunity. Hemp retail has always been an opportunity, even if when we were in the gray area. We have a very robust hemp retail industry in the state of Florida, thousands and thousands of retailers. Now it's required to participate in that way is you need to file for a hemp food establishment license. If you are currently selling CBD, selling hemp related products that are not from hemp seed that was never controlled, you are required to register with the Department of Agriculture and get a hemp food establishment permit. So it's, again, an easier route of entry into the cannabis industry would be ancillary, would be the hemp industry, but they are not without their own considerations and restrictions, which is why I do the work that I do, you do the work that you do, Easter, as far as advising companies, because it's still a very highly regulated industry. It's not something where you can just, hang up a shingle and start selling cannabis-related products. It's very complicated. You want to make sure you're not making claims. You want to make sure that you don't fall on the radar of the FDA. If you're manufacturing or storing anywhere in this country, you do need to register as an FDA food facility. So those are the types of things that we help people with in our practices. So I know it was a long answer, but those are some of the barriers I've identified as far as people who want to enter the cannabis industry and they don't find it as easy as they would expect. However, it is very lucrative if you do things the right way, and you can grow quickly so that you can become more and more compliant and more like traditional industries such as the pharmaceutical industry and the dietary supplement industry.
Thank you. I do see some questions that are coming in. I will bring these questions up, but I want to go ahead and move on to the federal level, and let's look at the MORE Act, and let's start unpacking that. So Marissa, if you could give us some details, some background on what's going on with the MORE Act and where it is currently.
I'm happy to do that. Yeah. So the MORE Act is a federal bill that would deschedule marijuana and provide for social justice in our marijuana policy. So this bill has really been in the works for a number of years now. And, you know, a coalition came together in support of the bill at the time that we started to see more and more states decriminalize marijuana or legalize marijuana. And what we noticed was that, you know, not all states were addressing the criminal justice impacts. Not all states were necessarily addressing equity. And we really wanted to make sure that when the federal government legalized, that they kept that at the top of its mind, just because of some of the harms that we've already discussed here. So our coalition came together, and you know, we brought in diverse perspectives in that coalition to make sure that we really got at the issue from every angle. And that effort led to the MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. That bill was first introduced in Congress, I believe, in 2018. It was marked up in 2019. And last year, we successfully passed it through the House, which was really exciting. It marked the first time that a congressional chamber voted to deschedule marijuana. Descheduling is really important when we're talking about the criminal justice impacts of marijuana activity. But also, you know, another huge benefit of descheduling is that it could help non-citizens who are legally working in the industry, who are patients, who are legally consuming marijuana, because federal prohibition still has very severe consequences for non-citizens, including detention and deportation. So for us, descheduling was a must-have in any marijuana policy. So aside from descheduling, the bill uses marijuana tax revenue to fund social justice programs that reinvest into people and communities that have been most targeted by marijuana prohibition. So first, it would promote a community reinvestment fund that would go to communities that have been most targeted by the war on drugs to build up community infrastructure, providing things like expungement services, legal services, job training, libraries, things of that nature. And then the other two funding streams are really dedicated at building up small business administration programming that could diversify the industry. Going back to your previous questions, you know, some barriers that we do see are just like the startup costs are, you know, very, very high. And you can imagine if you're a person with no connections who is low income, that's a really high barrier to entry even into the industry. So we wanted to make sure that the Small Business Administration could use some of that marijuana tax revenue to build up programming that would really invest in people who come from communities and who themselves have maybe experienced arrest or criminal legal impacts because of marijuana activity. So we do have funding for that, including funding that goes to states so that they could build up their equity programs too, to ensure that they have more diversity in the industry. As was alluded to earlier, despite the fact that marijuana has become more culturally acceptable in a booming industry, the industry is still overwhelmingly white male. People of color make up a minority of the industry. So, you know, it's an issue for a number of reasons, especially and probably most so because communities of color are the ones that are still bearing the brunt of enforcement. They are still the ones who are being policed, arrested, convicted, jailed for marijuana activity. So it's really important that we, you know, think of reparative justice in any marijuana policy. So in addition to those things, the bill would also make it so that nobody could lose access to federal public benefits for marijuana activity. So things like SNAP, TANF, housing, things of that nature. It would make it so that nobody could lose their federal security clearance for marijuana activity for, you know, the federal workforce. And again, it addresses immigration. So it would make sure that no one can be detained or deported for a marijuana offense or marijuana activity. And again, this is really important for places where we have state legal programs, because if a non-citizen is complying with state laws, they may not realize that there could be federal consequences because marijuana remains a Schedule I drug. So, you know, we really tried to build a robust bill that really centered people that have been most harmed by prohibition, that centered reparative justice and social justice. And we've been proud of that effort. I'm happy to say that a couple of weeks ago, the Senate introduced a Senate draft of a marijuana legalization bill. And they used the MORE Act as that foundation for their bill. So, you know, that bill is really the MORE Act plus robust regulations around what a federal scheme, you know, might look like. And our coalition, you know, was really happy about that. We are going to work to improve the Senate draft, and it's just a draft. So I think it's important for people to understand that. that what the Senate put out, and this was an effort led by Senators Booker, Wyden, and Schumer, was just a draft. And right now they're seeking public comment. They're taking public comment through September, and then they're going to put out a bill addressing, people's concerns and suggestions, all of that. So we expect that to come either later this year or early next year. So I think, as far as what the legislative landscape looks like for this year, we've reintroduced the MORE Act in the House. Our goal is to pass the MORE Act in the House again this year. Next year, I really think our attention is going to be fully on the Senate. I think the Senate will probably have a bill introduction late this year, early next year, and we're really going to have to work that bill in that chamber. It's great that, Schumer is the person leading this because he's the majority leader, and the fact that he has made a really strong commitment and statement with this draft is already huge. So I think at the federal level, we're on the cusp of actually doing something significant, which is really exciting.
And I'll just add that the name of that draft act of legislation is the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. So I echo everything that Marissa has indicated. That's a great opportunity on the Senate side. With regards to the MORE Act, I would also urge you to pay attention to the work of Parabola. You may have heard of Shalene Title. Shalene Title was a former policymaker with the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, and now she's working with Parabola and doing great policy work. And her recommendations for adjustments to the MORE Act are intended to make sure that when federal legalization happens, that it doesn't allow for these big industries to come in, and all of the small players that have been in existence being wiped out. So again, follow Parabola, follow Shalene Title, and the work that's being done there in conversations to make small tweaks to the MORE Act to make sure it's just not open season on small or existing marijuana companies. When these industries, big tobacco, big dietary supplement, big pharma, big food, when federal legalization happens, to make sure that we can still operate and our activist CEOs, our patient CEOs can continue to operate. But I agree with everything that Marissa said, absolutely accurate.
Yes, and I'll just add that Shalene has done wonderful work, and we've worked very closely with her and other regulators across the country to ensure that we can provide really strong recommendations to the Senate as they build out the regulations, because the MORE Act wasn't so much focused on federal regulations. That is really happening in the Senate. So we want to make sure that they get it right, because as Cheryl said, we want to make sure that we really are centering equity, that we give a real opportunity for small business folks to maintain their footing or get into the industry, and that there isn't a corporate takeover. All of those things are really important as we look at regulations.
Okay, I have a couple of questions that I'll go ahead and bring to you that are in the Q&A box, because some of them are relating to the things that are being discussed now. So someone did ask, has marijuana farming replaced tobacco farming at all in the States?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, with my involvement as a Black farmer myself, I'm a hemp farmer. I farmed hemp in 4 states with other partners: Pennsylvania, Maryland, South Carolina, and Florida. I currently still have my farm in Florida. And yesterday I was given the opportunity to testify in front of the USDA in their listening session with regards to racial barriers to racial equity in farming. So I really appreciate that question, because when you look at tobacco farming, there has been a downturn, and that downturn has disproportionately affected the Black farmer. We're not seeing where marijuana farmer has replaced tobacco, but we are seeing that hemp farming in some places like Tennessee, possibly Kentucky, we've seen that replacement of tobacco with hemp farming. Hemp has its own challenges. We've seen a significant price drop when it comes to hemp. I saw there was another comment about hemp and the fiber uses of the plant. I was one of the founding board members for the U.S. Hemp Building Association, and that's where we're focused on construction materials utilizing the hemp plant. So there's huge opportunity on the fiber side. On the extracts side of the hemp industry, there's still work to be done. I heard from the USDA last night that they are looking at ways to make sure that farmers are protected from this Wild West brokering that's been going on, which has left some farmers losing their life savings because they're left with the crop at the end of the day. I've always recommended that the PACA Act, the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act, include hemp and that the invoice amounts are lowered to protect the smaller farmer so that there are sanctions if people don't return for their hemp crop. So long answer to a short question. We're not seeing marijuana as a replacement to tobacco, but we are definitely seeing hemp being a viable, sustainable crop that has replaced tobacco in many markets and has potential to be even more of a replacement when you start exploring fiber uses of the plant and getting in place the processing equipment and the processing knowledge to make that a viable industry.
Thank you for that. I'll pose a couple of other questions, but I want to move, that's from the audience, but I want to move on next to looking at what the other countries are doing currently. Those, I do know that Canada is one of the countries that is legal in all senses. So I just kind of want, if you could tell us a little about what it is that these other countries are doing, and also how do we go about navigating decriminalizing it? So I want to talk about that a little bit too, as we talk about cannabis being legalized and headed that route.
Yeah, if Marissa's okay with it, I can take the international piece, and I'd love for you to tackle the decrim piece, if that's okay. So when we look at international markets, it's very interesting. Again, we're looking at the same three areas of the business. We have the the hemp side, you have the marijuana license holder side, and you have the ancillary side. So every country is doing things very differently. I've been fortunate where I've worked in a number of countries. I've even worked with prime ministers, ministers of agriculture. I sit on the board of standards committee for cannabis for the country of Jamaica. But just looking at Canada, which was like the first country to really put a stake in the ground, say we're going to go for federal legalization. Health Canada is looked at as a key standard. When I was doing the meetings with Bureau of Standards in Jamaica, we had speakers from Health Canada come, speak virtually via Skype or Zoom or whatever. So, Health Canada has taken the country a lot further than other countries have gotten to. Every country, just like every state is different, every country is different with regards even to their definition of what is legal cannabis, or what the distinction between a hemp product and a marijuana product. We know that in the United States, that measurement, it turns on two things. It turns on sourcing. Was it sourced from a legal license holder? And also, does it have less than 0.3% delta-9 THC? Well, other countries have 1% as a standard, and there's a growing lobby that would like to see 1% in the United States. In Europe, you're going to see rates as low as 0.2%. I've heard 0.1% THC being thrown around as well. So there really isn't standardization, but there's definitely a need for harmonization internationally. A lot of countries will choose to legalize hemp first. Last year I was in Ghana, Africa. It wasn't legal at the time. I had CBD with me and introduced some dignitaries to, CBD and all the things that hemp could do. And shortly after, within 3 weeks, they passed their, hemp legalization bill, and they're still working on the execution of that. In Ghana, when you look at South Africa, they have a thriving medical cannabis THC-based industry. Looking at Europe and the UK, France is just now, not even legislatively, but judicially, has found that CBD is legal over in France, whereas the UK, since their Brexit exit from the EU, they came up with a process for registering products as a novel food. EU has their own novel food registration process, and then the UK has their novel food registration. I had the privilege of submitting applications for my clients, and they started out with 1,000 applications at a time because there was a deadline. and now they're down to under 250 that they're still reviewing. And my clients' applications are still under review, which is a great thing. So, when it comes to the THC side, things are moving a lot slower in Europe, but what we are seeing is importation into Germany. Colombia just had a headline last week as far as their huge exportation that's happening. Israel's heavy in the exportation game. So when you look at the international market, it's, first it's, are they legalizing THC, or are they just legalizing CBD, and how do they define that distinction? And then beyond that, just looking at what parties they allow to participate. Are there rules only made for large players? And then finally, which is what everybody's looking for as a gold standard, is how's exportation work? Will they allow for importation? Are they going to be an exporting country? Is that an opportunity for that country? And working in Jamaica, exportation was always the goal. There's plenty of demand in Jamaica for the plant, plenty of demand in the region, the Caribbean region, as a unified region. But then when you look at exporting into Canada, there have been some small exports into Canada from Jamaica. So those are the key things that I watch for is, one, their definitions. Two, are they going to start at the hemp side? Or are they going to do both? Or are they just going to be focused on the medical marijuana side? And finally, how do they approach exportation and importation when it comes to looking at it internationally? But there's also a conversation that needs to be had about sacramental use. As Rastafari, we use cannabis medicinally and meditationally as a sacrament, and that's something that there's opportunity to explore. Some countries have looked at ADP programs, alternative development programs, which are intended to take the illicit industry into the legal industry and allowing farmers to be less reliant on cartels and participate in a legal cannabis industry through an ADP program being implemented. So the international space is really exciting. I watch headlines and news stories in all countries, all regions of the world. But we do have enough to ponder right here in the United States as well. As far as what's the perfect model, it depends on what you want. And there are people lobbying from all angles as far as what they want. I believe that the plant should be completely free. That's what I work towards. I am a huge hemp supporter, but I also support the marijuana side of things. So each country is different. If you're looking at legislation and historical legislation and in other countries, especially colonial countries, especially a former British Empire, you'll see language such as Indian hemp as an overall term being used for whether it's hemp, cannabis, cannabis with THC, and in their older legislation, part of their Dangerous Drug Act legislation, you're going to see it referenced as Indian hemp, and that's all inclusive of all types of uses of the plant, and that's what they have to dismantle as they move forward. But I am proud to say as a Jamaican that Jamaica is the first country that has in modern times legalized sacramental use of the plant in alignment with United Nations policies on use of sacramental, having sacramental use for culture. So I'll hand off to Maritza to really talk about some decriminalization efforts and initiatives that we can engage in.
I'm unclear as to the question. What was the question?
I was asking, how do we navigate going through the decriminalization of cannabis as we head towards, or we seek to work towards legalizing cannabis? Decriminalization, that was something that I wanted to discuss.
Marijuana decriminalization?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm still very unclear about the question. I apologize.
So I was like, we were talking about the cannabis just working towards legalizing it, and we looked at the MORE Act and impacting that and things that were in that bill. So I wanted us to look at the decriminalization components. How would
I
we?
may be dry. I may have driven in my handoff some of the confusion. So let me just start as far as like when you look at a process of legalization in a market, it usually starts with the decriminalization. So before you have like a legal viable industry, you're going to have decrim where if you're caught with a certain amount, you're not going to get incarcerated. You may get a ticket, or some type of fine or something like that. And that's usually the first step. You'll hear people saying, I'm for decriminalization, but I'm not for legalization. So, that's kind of where it starts. And I know some of the MORE Act components that Maritza spoke about earlier speaks to decriminalization. I don't know if you want to kind of dig deeper into like expungement type activities, Maritza, and things like that. But those are things that I wholeheartedly support. National Diversity and Inclusion Cannabis Association, they're doing a lot of expungement activities across the country, as well as Minorities for Medical Marijuana. They're doing a lot of expungement activities. So I'm all for anything to expunge records. When Illinois went legal, like I think it was January 1st, 2000, maybe it was 2020, 770,000 criminal records were expunged automatically by the governor January 1st. So those are the types of things that we want to see.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think any federal bill or any state bill for that matter, or law, needs to really address the criminal legal aspect of all of this by providing for the automatic expungement and resentencing of marijuana convictions and ensure that those convictions are retroactive. Those should be at no cost to the person, and they should also be, things that happen automatically. That's exactly what was included in the MORE Act. It's included in the Senate draft. But the distinction I really see between the MORE Act and the Senate draft is, we've been saying that the MORE Act is more of a descheduling bill, or a decriminalization bill, because it deschedules. It removes federal penalties and criminalization associated with marijuana activity by removing it from Schedule 1. Whereas the Senate bill, I would say, is actually more of a legalization bill because it really starts to build out a regulatory framework for marijuana. So I kind of, I guess you could say the MORE Act is also a legalization bill, but I've actually seen it as primarily a decrim bill first.
And a question from an attendee: what tools or laws are being instituted to keep cartels or big corporations from taking control of the legalized cannabis market?
Yeah, that's really great question. So as we talked about, Maritza and I, with regards to the MORE Act and some suggestions that are recommended by the Parabola, they need all the support you can get. So if this is something you're interested in, really definitely reach out to the Parabola, Shalene Title, and support their efforts and their conversation. She's highly respected as a policy consultant. So, but any grassroots support and calling your legislators and just making sure they're aware that's how you feel about it. On a state-by-state basis, there's good news. There's some equity activity happening. New Jersey just passed a really robust, fair equity bill right after I got an opportunity due to my friend Leo Bridgewater, who's an activist and veteran up there, to speak at the Trenton City Hall about a month ago at an event called Cannabis Night Live, where they celebrated recreational legalization or adult use legalization, and the fact that they had equity bills and there's an opportunity for micro businesses. And after that, I got to sit in and actually speak on their New Jersey Cannabis Commission meeting that took happen within days of that event. So, pay attention to the equity provisions in legalization that happens. If you don't have equity in your state, ask for it. Make sure your legislators know. Again, I took the initiative working with legislators such as Anika Umfroy, Randolph Bracy, to write a bill, an equity bill last session. It didn't pass, but that's how legalization happens. You got to take multiple bites of the apple. You can't be discouraged. And we're going to refile. So Florida is a state that hasn't entertained equity, but we're not going to stop until they do. When you look at, so New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, that whole pyramid of states had really successful equity bills passed. Illinois, definitely great stuff. A lot of community reinvestment included in there. There are craft grower licenses that are allowed for minority participants, dispensary licenses that are prioritized for veterans. They just last week gave out 10 craft grower licenses directly to veteran applicants, and then they're going to do a couple more rounds of giving out those licenses between now and December, I believe. So those are the things that we look to. We always have to give honor and appreciate California, specifically Oakland, California, because that's where the equity movement was born. Oakland, California was the first municipality to say, hey, we need to make sure the small guy's protected. So, you know, I'm of the school of thought that we don't pass any adult use legislation unless it includes some type of equity provision. You don't get adult use for these big players who are already monopolizing the medicinal space unless they are open to and they allow for equity provision. So when you do go to adult use, which will significantly increase the number of people who are utilizing the service, people who are visiting dispensaries, that there's a place for small business, micro businesses, minorities of variety of backgrounds to participate and earn and change their the history of their families and create multi-generational wealth. It is a non-negotiable when it comes to looking at moving forward and progressing to adult use. There needs to be some types of equity provisions. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Minorities for Medical Marijuana and their founder, Roz McCarthy, who, when I was their general counsel, was helpful in getting diversity language in Florida. So although we don't have equity language, people do get extra points for working with minority contractors, veteran contractors, as they're opening up their shops and as they're submitting their application. But working with us is not the same as us being able to be at the table with you. So the next step would be some type of equity legislation. And we're really excited about getting people mobilized to push in that direction.
Thank you for that. So moving forward, that's what I want to talk about now as we kind of wind down. And I'm going to start pulling in questions because the Q&A is getting busy. So I'm gonna go ahead and start pulling those questions in so you guys can get those answered for our attendees before we have to wrap up. Someone said that they are, thank you for your work, first of all, and they recently entered law school because they were appalled by mass incarceration and how drug prohibition and criminalization has taken control and just kind of dominating. What advice do you have for law students and or lawyers who want to have an impact on drug legalization?
Yeah, I think, you know, law school students are very special, near and dear to my heart. Pre-law students are very near and dear to my heart. I always speak at the National Pre-Law Conference. If you on, I think it's nationalprelawconference.org. It's an organization that's led by Evangeline, my good friend attorney, Evangeline. I can't remember her last name now, but Evangeline Mitchell, she's a sweetheart. But she's been working on this conference for like over 15 years, trying to create more minority lawyers. So definitely engage with her organization because they do have, you know, attorney speakers, but they have law school student speakers as well. So you can be involved and take the lead in that way. I will be speaking at an event for them on this Friday. Also, you know, internships. You know, find your cannabis attorney, see if they have opportunity to intern. I've taken FAMU and FIU law interns every summer up until the pandemic. And now that we're more remote, it's more difficult, but there are opportunities, especially with these bigger firms, for you to intern in the area of cannabis now. Also reading, just making sure that you stay on track with reading and keeping up with what's going on. Set your Google alerts for cannabis your state, marijuana, medical marijuana your state, so you can stay up to date with what's going on in the industry. I think the best thing that a law school student can do is graduate. That's why I always say to activist law school students, the most important thing that you can do at this point is to matriculate, is to finish. Once you finish, once you pass the bar, then that opportunity expands. But we don't want you getting distracted with activism, if you're sacrificing your ability to graduate and graduate on time, because we need more lawyers of color, we need more minority lawyers, we need more empowered lawyers who are sensitive to the needs of others. So that would be my advice for a law school student. Again, there's plenty of YouTube video of me speaking at events such as this. You can put my name into YouTube and start watching some of the talks that I've given and educating yourself. ACS has a tremendous amount of resources. ACLU also has a tremendous amount of resources with regards to this particular issue. So when you have downtime, when you're not supposed to be studying for your law school classes, please go on YouTube. There's plenty of stuff. My last bit of advice is, because of the pandemic, because we are more in a virtual environment, go on Eventbrite. You can sit in on events, and a lot of them are free events all over the world with regards to cannabis for free by going on Eventbrite, putting in cannabis, putting in medical marijuana, and then you'll be surprised what you pick up. Paying attention to what the FDA is doing, paying attention to what the USDA is doing is also important if this is an area of practice that interests you.
Okay. Did you have anything to add to that, Marissa?
I'll just throw out, yeah, sure. The Drug Policy Alliance does have legal internships, and you can, if you're interested, you can apply to work in our legal office. It's based out of Oakland. We're all virtual now, so not that really matters. Or you can apply for a national office. So I head the national office, and we do most of the work with Congress and the administration. So if you're interested in the federal policymaking aspect of it, I would encourage you to apply there. But definitely take internships that speak to your passion. I think the public interest route is generally tougher. I feel like law schools generally support public interest lawyers less, which is really shameful in my opinion. But nonetheless, stick to it. If you're passionate about it, the opportunities will come. So I would encourage you to keep looking for those internship opportunities.
Okay, and another question. This one is about post-conviction. So what movements exist to repair for years of lost people's lives convicted of marijuana crimes once it becomes no longer a crime?
Yeah, I think fortunately we can say there's a lot of interest in that area. So, there are really three pillars for me of activism in the marijuana industry. One is social justice, the other one is social equity, and the third one is social responsibility. So when it comes to social justice, it's doing exactly what you're talking about, trying to forward bills that will allow for expungement, allow for people who are wrongly incarcerated for marijuana crimes to be released from prison, reducing sentences, reducing or increasing the amounts of cannabis you can have without being sanctioned. So social justice issues are definitely at the forefront. And when we're seeing these equity bills being written, it doesn't just turn on the person who was wrongly convicted of marijuana charges and them getting the benefit of priority licensing, but also their families. And so how because there was an Ohio case which found it unconstitutional to write those bills based on race. How they do it is by identifying disproportionately impacted areas and neighborhoods by either city name or zip code. So that's traditionally how we look to resolve the issue, is making sure that not only are we getting people out of prison, not only are we giving them a fresh start by expunging their records, but we're giving them priority with regards to licensing based on either them having a conviction themselves or them being a family member of someone who was incarcerated, or them being a disproportionately impacted area by the war on drugs, where law enforcement victimize them in their own communities.
Okay, and I have a few more questions. So if my panelists are okay, I will pose those questions because I know we are at the 1 o'clock hour. So
Yeah.
Another question was, I'm not a cannabis user, hemp or marijuana, but would a person need to have experience in using it in order to develop a business in cannabis farming?
No, absolutely not. We're not an elitist group of activists. We are not hierarchical in nature. You can participate in our industry whether you're a user of cannabis or not. But what we do ask is that you are respectful of those who paid the price for you to even have the privilege. And you have a responsibility to give back to the communities that you're making money off of. And you need to honor our patients that were the ones who, took their sick children in strollers to the capitals in order to say this is a real situation. Our combat veterans who have post-traumatic stress disorders that went to the capitals in order for there to be legalization. So we are very welcoming. The plant itself is a unifier. That's the distinction between marijuana and alcohol. Alcohol may tend to make people a little bit more, violent in nature or wrathful, whereas, cannabis in consumption tends to unify people and make people feel more chill and more relaxed. So we do welcome you, but you do have a responsibility if you want to make money off this highly lucrative multi-billion-dollar industry. You can't just slide in, take the money out, and go about your business. You need to do good work, because we're in here doing good work. We've been doing good work for decades, and that's the only reason why you have the opportunity in the first place. But no, we don't require you to consume cannabis. I recommend that you, add it to one of the options with your physician as far as if, taking care of any ailments. Again, it doesn't have to be on the THC side, which it, has the effect of making you feel intoxicated. It can be on the CBD side. You might find that enriches your life. We have topical products which are not internally consumed, which people have found great benefits from, people with arthritis and things like that. So, it's not a requirement, but I highly recommend that you understand the product that you're aiming to sell and work with our physician community that has held themselves out there as experts, just like they're experts in pharmaceutical medications.
Thank you. So we are getting past that 1 o'clock hour, and you both have given us so much information, and this was definitely a session that was jam-packed, and is definitely something that is worth continuing at another time. So I just wanted to give you both the opportunity for any closing statements that you wanted to make before we wrap up for the attendees. I see some are leaving, so I just wanted to give you a chance to just give us a couple of statements or some words, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up.
I'll let Marissa go first, but I know she's on a time has a time commitment. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just encourage people to follow the Drug Policy Alliance if you're interested in learning more about the work that we're doing, not just around marijuana, but to generally end the and drug prohibition overall. So you could follow us at drugpolicyalliance.org. And you can sign up for our newsletter. We often put out action alerts and just general information about the different issues that we're working on. If you're interested in marijuana, there's definitely opportunities to engage, especially by contacting your members of Congress and asking them to support the MORE Act in the House. That would be most helpful right now to building momentum for what we're going to see in the Senate. And again, we think that fight's going to happen next year. So follow DPA, contact your member of Congress in support of the MORE Act. And thanks for your time.
Yeah, I think all that I would say is, get involved, do something. Yeah, there's plenty of work to be done. We're tired. Like I'm exhausted, but I just won't stop. There's plenty to be done. So get involved, find the organization that aligns with your particular interest, and do something. Don't just look at, hey, I saw a headline about billions of dollars and want to take part in that. Look at how you can contribute in some way to the industry and to the patient. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Easter. Thank you, Maritza. I've learned a lot from you today. And thank you to ACS for being responsible enough to host a session such as this, because one, it's a hot topic, and two, it's a public health situation. It is a anti-discrimination situation that we're talking about. So when we're talking about racial equality, we can't talk about racial equality without talking about marijuana policy. We can't avoid another George Floyd situation without talking about our marijuana policies, and that's the bottom line talk. I know there's been a lot of civil rights discussions over the past year and a half and things like that, but how do we make the change? Yes, we definitely want to see people who take advantage, abuse their authority, like Chauvin, go to prison. We want to see that become a practice. But we also, beyond that, unfortunately, George Floyd has gone on and he's joined his mother in his death. But what can we do to make sure that these young men coming up, these young ladies coming up, don't be put in that same type of position where they have this criminal history based on cannabis? A cannabis charge is the gateway to the criminal justice system. So we need to change the laws to protect our young people. We need to change the laws so they don't lose that opportunity to go to college or lose that scholarship because they were consuming something for their own health. So that's what it's all about. It's that serious. We're in the business of making sure that young people get an opportunity to meet their full potential, and that they get to they're not discriminated against because of the color of their skin or what neighborhood they come from, that they have the same opportunities of everyone else, whether that they'll have the opportunity to go to Harvard, or they get the opportunity to go to Howard, or they get the opportunity to go to FAMU or community college, wherever they choose to go, or if they choose to find a trade. But we don't want that cut short just because they made a mistake, or cut short because they needed medicinal treatment and didn't like how pills felt for them. That's what we're fighting. That is the fight that we're in.
Thank you for those closing statements. Thank you to both of my panelists. Thank you to ACS for providing this platform. And again, ACS is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. ACS does not endorse any political candidate or party. Views that were expressed here today reflect the individual opinions of our speakers, and they should not be attributed to ACS. So with that being said, thank you to everyone who was in attendance. Again, thank you both, Cheryl and Maritza. This has been a very robust discussion, and the Q&A was definitely moving. Some of the questions I kind of rolled up together, but I think we pretty much was able to answer all of the questions. So again, thank you. And if nothing else, this has been great. And this is the end of our presentation. Thank you both.